The chessboard killer. They called him the chessboard killer because he kept a ledger no one else could see. A 64-square cathedral where every square needed a name, and every name needed a body. In Moscow's grey sprawl, he lured them with cheap vodka and promises of views from the park bridge, then arranged them in his head the way a grandmaster arranges an evidence. 48 times, the world stayed quiet. 48 times, a square darkened. When they finally caught Alexander Pichushkin, he didn't look surprised. He looked inconvenienced, like a player forced to pause a one-game. He told them he kept track with a board each victim, a piece claimed, each square a confession. The police searched his apartment and found the board on his table, a cheap set with fingerprints pressed into the edges where he'd held it too tightly, eyes gone somewhere far away. In the interrogation room, the detective slid the board between them. "Show me," he said. Pichushkin set the pieces without looking down, muscle memory doing the work. "You think of it like a puzzle," he said, almost gently. "But it's music. The moves already know themselves." He touched a black square, then another, tapping a rhythm. 48, plus the ones you missed. The detective didn't flinch. "We didn't miss any." Pichushkin smiled, thin, triumphant. "You only count what you find. Check your lake. Check your drain. Check your missing who didn't belong to anyone." They did. They found nothing. The papers printed 48, then at least 48, then likely more. The board went into evidence, bagged, tugged, and shelved. Months later, a junior clerk stayed late, buried in cold files. The building's lights ran on timers. At 2 a.m., most of the floor went dim, leaving a web of yellow islands. He took the chessboard killer's file down for the morbid thrill of it. He told himself it was just history, just ink. The evidence bag crinkled as he set the board on the desk. He shouldn't have, but he did. He opened it. The pieces were lighter than they looked, worn smooth. He set them in starting position, thinking it would bleed off the superstition. But the board wasn't marked for a fresh game. 48 squares had faint scratches inside them, almost invisible unless the office's bad light hit just right. The clerk leaned closer. The scratches weren't random, they were initials, carved tight and hurried. Letters cramped to fit within the dark. He checked the inventory. No mention of carvings. Swallow it. From the hallway, a cleaning cart squeaked, then went silent. The clerk looked up and saw no one. He glanced back down and found a white pawn and moved forward one square. He hadn't touched it. Set it back very carefully. He told himself the desk was uneven. He pressed the board flat with his palm. The room's air felt thin, like an elevator between floors. He looked again. A black knight sat on a new square, shadow angled, like it had leaned into place. He stood too fast and the chair skittered. "Stop," he said, feeling ridiculous. His voice died against the glass of the evidence room. He reached for the bag to seal the board. On the board, a tiny sound. Wood ticking wood. He watched the King Shivara, motion so small he would V missed it if he de-blinked then drift half an inch. Not a slide. A choice. The clerk checked the file S victim list and did something he would never tell anyone. He counted the scratched squares. 48. He flipped the board over, hands shaking, to see if the wood was warped. If magnet had been embedded. Underneath, someone had carved 4 more initials into the raw base. Fresh, pale wood shone where the blade had bitten. Not 49, not 50, not 51 4 neat sets, sitting like a promise. The last one wasn't letters at all. It was a day tomorrow. The lights flickered. Footsteps paused at the door. The clerk called out, "Hello, no answer." He looked back and saw the pieces had begun setting themselves into a middle game. Positions ruthless, precise. The king stood calm while pawns marched forward, one by one, filling rank after rank. He stuffed the board into the bag, jammed the seal, shoved it back on the shelf, spine toward the wall. The sound stopped. He didn't sleep that night. He came back early, heart pounding, to check the evidence room. The shelf was emptier by 1 box. He traced the log. Released to court for review. But there'd been no request. No one had signed it out. The camera outside the room showed a smear of motion at 3:06 a.m., like a coat passing frame to frame without a person inside it. At noon, the city reported a body in the park, then another by dusk. 2 more by morning. Strangers with nothing in common, except for where they fell. Points that, if anyone had laid a chessboard over the map, would have matched for perfect squares. The clerk called in sick and never went back. Years later, people still argue the number. 48 confirmed. The articles say, always skating the edge of certainty. Possibly 60, some whisper. But the clerk knows. The board didn't care what people counted. It only cared what was owed. He hears the pieces at night sometimes, when the refrigerator cuts off and his apartment goes quiet. A soft click-click, as if something is keeping time in the walls. On those nights, he wakes to find the calendar on his phone has shifted. A date highlighted with no event attached. A square brighter than the others, a little more real. And the next day, the news will say a name, and the city will add a flower to a fence. And somewhere an old board will seem a shade heavier, satisfied for one move. On his table, a travel chess set sits with the lid taped shut. He won't throw it out. He won't open it. He keeps the tape fresh, not because it can hold anything in, but because he needs to believe a game like that ends when the lid closes. It doesn't. It only waits for the next square.